Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. One of the best things about BetterHelp is that treatment is discreet and convenient. I know that especially in a small town, it might be difficult to find treatment, or it may be intimidating because small town gossip spreads like wildfire. You shouldn't feel judged for seeking help with your mental health. But if that's what's been holding you back, fear not, BetterHelp is here to save the day. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera unless you want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. And thanks to the great people at BetterHelp, I have a special offer for Obscure History listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/obscure. That's betterhelp.com/obscure. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. History, as it is told to you, is often merely a snapshot. A moment frozen in time, sometimes contextualized properly, sometimes not. More accurately, history is a semi-transparent overlay. Every new action is simply draped over the past until what is behind is no longer visible. It can be poetic, it can be tragic. Most interesting of all, it can be literal. Cities can be built atop prior cities, and people can live just above the graves of their predecessors. Usually, none the wiser. My name is Josh, and this is Obscure History. It's a story that is often told, the European expansion into the Western Hemisphere. The subject is easy to look at from afar. It is so intricately complex that one almost needs to look at it in the macro. It's a real big picture sort of history. But something interesting happens when we look at it more closely. In 1669, King Charles II granted land permits, including the eastern part of the present state of West Virginia, to supporters of his family. But before that, the land that we call West Virginia was a bustle with activity. Archaeological evidence has led researchers to believe that around 14,000 years ago, our ancestors used this land as a hunting ground for woolly mammoths, giant Ice Age ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. Despite fighting against the harshest and most dangerous conditions, our human ancestors won the battle for survival. Though they outlasted colossal beasts and unimaginably deadly creatures, the earth in its perpetual flux shifted and changed, scattering those ancient humans to parts unknown. The Ice Age ended, and then the earth warmed, and then it was the medieval warm period, followed by the Little Ice Age. This dance of feast and famine is known by scientists today as cycles of glacial and interglacial climate. But for our ancestors, these interstitions of life and death of vegetation dictated where their homes could be. After generations of wandering, communities of mound-building people known as Fort Ancients began resettling in this same land. Their constructs sitting atop the bones of prehistoric beasts and their food grown from soil nurtured by the blood of their ancestors. This culture evolved and progressed. The land gave of its resources bountifully, and more people began to call this lush swath of Appalachia their home. According to our best estimates, this land was shared by the Fort Ancient and Monongahela people, who were an early development of the native group we would know as the Iroquois only a few generations later. This development continued, and by the time European settlers made their way to West Virginia, the major language groups inhabiting the region were the Central Algonquin, the Iroquoian, and the Ohio Valley Siouan. Perhaps this seems to be a weird way to note people groups, but if you study pre-European history of the United States, you'll find that language groups are often the only way to understand the demographics of native groups. A very thorough and accurate summation of this dilemma can actually be found on the Proto-History of West Virginia wiki page. Native American groups had not yet formed the large political tribes known from the historical era during the 18th and 19th centuries, and many tribal names used in historical literature do not apply in the 17th century. Many tribal names were actually amalgamations of earlier groups that had been decimated by wars and disease and banded together for mutual safety. Groups were also known by many different names, which also made identifying specific groups difficult. Group names were often recorded before the group met Europeans, and was frequently the name that enemies knew them by and in a different language family from what the group themselves spoke. Life continued to flourish in Appalachia, and by the time European settlers from France and England made their way to this area, they would record the presence of the Seneca, Onondaga, Oneida, Cayuga, Mohawk, Susquehannock, Chononton, and Erie people, as well as many other native groups. It would be misleading to say that North America had been a peaceful utopia before the arrival of European settlers to the area. There was bloodshed and rivalry. There were disputes and contention. But what can be said with full confidence is that the arrival of European settlers to North America ushered in an apocalypse for millions of native people that had called the continent home. It began in the East, settlers claiming land as their own, natives falling en masse to superior technology, crooked business, and devastating illness. And as the population of native people began to fall along the East Coast, European settlers pushed inland. Eventually, Virginia would be completely colonized and claimed by Europeans, and the territory west would be penetrated by European families searching for their own slice of the New World, explorers collecting a check to map the unknown, and those who simply wanted more space between themselves and the native people who were trying to start a life in a largely hostile new world. The implications of this clash of culture is so immense that it is difficult to accurately conceptualize. Alexander Koch, Chris Beerley, Mark Maslin, and Simon Lewis explain this macabre phenomenon in an article for the academic journal Science Direct. They say, our new data-driven best estimate is a death toll of 56 million by the beginning of the 1600s, 90% of the pre-Columbian indigenous people, and around 10% of the global population at the time. This makes the Great Dying the largest human mortality event in proportion to the global population, putting it second in absolute terms only to World War II, in which 80 million people died, 3% of the world's population at the time. This human tragedy meant that there were simply not enough workers left to manage the fields and forests. Without human intervention, previously managed landscapes returned to their natural states, thereby absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. The extent of this regrowth of natural habitat was so vast it removed enough CO2 to cool the planet. The lower temperatures prompted feedbacks in the carbon cycle which eliminated more CO2 from the atmosphere, such as less CO2 being released from the soil. This explains the drop in CO2 at 1610 seen in Antarctic ice cores, solving an enigma of why the whole planet cooled briefly in the 1600s. During this period, severe winters and cold summers caused famines and rebellions from Europe to Japan. In essence, the Great Dying, as it is often called, was such a monumentally catastrophic disaster it actually altered the planet and caused political strife all across the globe. And atop those lost cultures, new cultures were built. Houses, cobblestone streets, logging camps, churches, banks, and blacksmitheries covered over ancient mounds and villages that had once stood before. Mounds and villages that were built over top the ancient bones and blood of prehistoric beasts and ancient human relatives. History stacking upon itself, inhabiting the same physical space. Memories overlaying memories until those that came before were forgotten and neglected, simply expelled from the record. And in our brief survey of West Virginia, we have reached what many would call modern history. Of course, this term is problematic for a few reasons. First, time is relative. Modern history is only modern to those who determine it is modern. Despite our best wishes, we will all be ancient eventually. Second, it is really meant to imply history documented by Europeans, as native histories are often relegated to the equally ambiguous title of proto-history. And finally, because once something is labeled as modern, there is an unspoken implication that it is done changing. That is simply untrue. Don't believe me? Watch Home Alone 2, and then watch Spider-Man. You'll notice there are two very important buildings missing from the skyline. Modern history is a semantic device used to denote European influence. Nothing more. Modern history changes daily in big and little ways. In ways that we can see plainly and in ways that are only noticed by a very small group of people. And of course, West Virginia isn't done changing. After its colonization, it has undergone thousands of changes. One, however, I find particularly poetic. But before we get to that, we need to pay the bills. If you want to hear ad-free episodes with bonus content, hit that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts and enjoy. For the risk of spoilers, I can't elaborate too much, but just know that subscribers will get to hear a couple of other stories about, let's say, disastrous changes in modern history. For everyone else, there is a free Discord server for obscure history listeners. If you don't know what Discord is, just imagine a chat room full of history nerds sharing fun ideas for future episodes and making jokes about history professors. If that sounds fun to you, it is completely free. The invite link is in the show notes. If you have never tried Discord before, this might be a good time to try it. I would love to chat with all of you. I am on there regularly and definitely have lots of fun. In the rolling hills of West Virginia, there is an oasis for outdoor recreation, a place for people to connect with and enjoy nature in a powerful and exciting way. According to the website, superb water quality and sheer sandstone cliffs make Summersville Lake a unique place to visit. West Virginia's largest lake, Summersville Lake, has over 2,800 acres of water and 60 miles of shoreline. Boating, water skiing, swimming, fishing for large and smallmouth bass, walleye, panfish, and catfish, scuba diving, picnicking, hunting, and biking are the favorite activities enjoyed by nearly 1 million visitors annually. Those millions of visitors probably didn't realize that just below the wake of their jet skis and fishing lines was the remains of another life. As settlers pushed into the west, European communities started to form. Outposts at first, then villages, towns, and eventually cities. One of these communities eventually assembled under the name Gad, in the territory known today as West Virginia. Very little is known about the founding of Gad, though it is suspected that it was named after a prominent farming family. At first, it was but a loose collection of farms and homesteads, but by the mid-1800s, it was a well-established township boasting a general store, a post office, a schoolhouse, and enough domiciles to house every resident. And the community continued to grow this way. Gradual, productive, just a simple, satisfying rural existence. That is, until a very unique building project was proposed. According to the August 28th edition of the 1966 Rowley Register, Summersville Reservoir, to be dedicated in ceremonies here September 3rd, seems destined to become a major recreation area in the eastern states with an economic impact throughout the country. The dedication ceremony to which President Johnson has been invited will highlight a 6-year construction job by the Huntington District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The dam and reservoir represents a federal investment of more than $46 million. The Saturday program, scheduled for 11 a.m., is sponsored by the Summersville Chamber of Commerce. Co-chairman of the planning committee are William S. Bryant and Mayor J.M. Tully. Built to control floods, improve water quality, and provide for recreation, Summersville Reservoir will have the largest surface area of any lake in West Virginia. Army engineers estimate the benefits, including prevention of flood damages and improvement of water quality, will average about $2.5 million annually. As a recreation area, authorities estimate Summersville will attract millions of tourists annually. Its 3,000-foot landing strip, a cooperative venture of the state's Corps of Engineers and Federal Aviation Agency, puts the lake within easy reach of airborne travelers from throughout the eastern United States. 3 boat launching sites with parking for 200 cars and trailers, 4 camping areas with a total of 120 campsites, and a scenic overlook with picnic and parking facilities have been built or are now in construction by the Corps of Engineers. West Virginia is supporting the recreation at the reservoir and has built an access road linking the public use area with the state highway system. The Summersville project is a major link in a 3-reservoir system which includes Bluestone and Sutton reservoirs, all built by the Army engineers. The 3 lakes were designed to control floods in the highly industrialized Kanawha River Valley. Summersville Lake was formed by damming the Gauley River, while Bluestone is on the New River and Sutton is on the Elk River. The New and Gauley Rivers merged to form the Kanawha at the Gauley Bridge. The Elk is a major tributary entering the Kanawha at Charleston. The flood control benefits of the 3 reservoirs are also important to the entire Ohio River Valley. Water held back at Summersville during flood seasons will have a direct effect on the river crests all the way up to the Mississippi. Of national importance is Summersville Reservoir's effect on the industrial complex in the Kanawha Valley. The chemical industry centered at Charleston, and one of the largest of its kind in the world, demands large quantities of water. Water released from Summersville will help provide chemical plants with the kind of water needed to sustain this vital industry in West Virginia. The chemical industry employs more than 21,000 in the Charleston area and contributed about $500 million to the 1965 gross national product. Certainly, the project sounded lovely. It was beneficial economically, it was beneficial for the environment. It seemed like a win-win. That is, it seemed like a win-win for everyone outside the little village of Gad. The Army Corps of Engineers purchased the land from underneath the residents of Gad and forced them to relocate as the small village was going to be completely submerged by the backwater of the dam. I'm sure that this was tragic for the families who had called Gad home for generations. It must be a very unique and unknowable kind of emotion, a sense of impending doom. The paperwork had been filed, the money exchanged, and on September 3rd, 1966, the Summersville Reservoir was officially opened. And just as predicted, it was a huge hit. It quickly became an integral part of the tourist economy in West Virginia, and it really did draw in millions of people who used the lake for all manner of summer fun. But it seems as if those millions of people didn't quite realize that an entire town had been sacrificed to bring Summersville Lake to life. And people continued to neglect the memory of Gad. In a sense, it was nearly erased from our history like so many other things that had come before it. But luckily, the world's interest in Gad was reawoken in 2016 when an amateur scuba diver made a shocking discovery. The article ran on the website Visit Southern West Virginia. It read, "Scuba divers in Summersville Lake discovered the sunken town of Gad is intact. The long-lost town is perfectly preserved under Summersville Lake. Though it seems unbelievable, the lake bed shifted and revealed Gad for the first time in decades. Only the surface was opaque," said Michael Reese, whose family made the discovery while on vacation. "As we swam away from the marina and dove down, we saw this incredible town just sitting there like it was planted yesterday. Gad, once a quiet farming town in Nicholas County, had been sacrificed to Summersville Lake when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers constructed a dam for flood control in the 1960s. The 2,700-acre reservoir has crystal depths, craggy shoreline, and the clearest water east of the Mississippi, which made it easy for vacationers to spot the sunken town. Summersville Lake soft bottom shifted Thursday, releasing thousands of pounds of sediment from 327 feet below the surface. The Reese family didn't expect much as they looked at the muddied water, but rented scuba equipment anyways. It was like pretty muddy, Petra Reese said. I was like, Dad's lost his mind. But beneath the surface they discovered a town frozen in time. The Reese family later shared photos they took with special underwater cameras. Their pictures show clapboard houses, tidy fences, and parked cars, just like a movie set. I felt like a kid again, M. Reese said. I saw a Studebaker and several Packards. His daughter posted a snapshot of a family home on Facebook. Her picture shows a plain 2-story house with a chimney and blue shutters. Incredibly, the windows are still in perfect condition. You can even see a rope swing in the yard. And this is where I feel everything is tied together in a tragic and poetic way. Happy tourists have picnics on the shore of Summersville Lake, above the sunken city of Gad, which was built atop the ancestral homes of those who were forced out of their land by newcomers. Land that had previously been hunting grounds for our ancient human relatives. If we could sit in a boat on the surface of Summersville Lake and peel back the layers of time, we could see majestic woolly mammoths and Native American chiefs, old-timey farmers doing lunch with frat bros from WVU. Life, death, birth, and bloodshed, all at once in one small slice of existence. If we could see everything at once, we would be overwhelmed by the glory of life and the power of our history. But our eyes are clouded by the veil of time, and instead we simply see a large body of water, some bros cracking open a case of Natty Lights, and a grandfather with his fishing rod cast in the shade. Exactly how he wants it. Such is the nature of history. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. I sincerely appreciate all of you. Just a reminder, check out the Discord. The invite link is in the show notes. If you've never used Discord, just imagine it really is a lot like an old school Yahoo chat room or something. There are sections of the server that are divided up for history memes, on this day reminders. There's a general chat section that I'm in quite a bit. It's just a fun time. One of my goals for this year is to get to know my listeners better, and this seemed like a good way. It is completely free, and hopefully maybe once we get a lot of people in there, we'll be able to do some fun events or something. There's an option for streaming there as well, so perhaps maybe one of these days, once we get enough people in there, we could stream something historical or a trivia night or something. Who knows? There are endless possibilities, but you've got to get there before those things happen, I guess. Special shout out, as always, to Greg at Indie Drop-In Network and Ariel at Earbuds Podcast Collective. Go check out their products. They are amazing people. They are helping out the podcast industry in big ways, and I am very, very happy to know both of them. Check out their stuff. Links in the show notes for all of it. I appreciate you listening. I will talk to you next week.